If it's a fire, who gets called? Us. If it's a heart attack, who gets called? Us. Jacks of all trades. And we need to remember that people don't call us usually because they want to. They call us because they don't know who else to call. And our job is to serve.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the First Things First, a show where we talk about setting our priorities in the right order to help us fall in love with the job again and live out our God-given purpose in the fire service. Today, I am so excited to have my brother and my friend, Colby Rich. He is a man of God. He is a husband, a father, a firefighter, an author, and a podcaster. He is here with the podcast Called to Lead, and he has a book that he wants to talk to us and share. So with that nice intro, brother, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Man, I'm excited to have a conversation with you. Once again, the great internet brought us together. I found your page actually through a friend of mine, Daniel Alice from Faith in the Firehouse. And so I shot you a message. We connected. And man, it feels like I've known you for a long time already, even though it's only been a couple of weeks. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and who Colby Rich is?
Well, I'm in North Texas, so we're almost Oklahoma. We're about an hour north of Dallas, close to the Red River there. And so we, I grew up, I live in the town that I grew up in. And I moved away for a few years. I grew up here, grew up on a farm. And so we had cows and ponds and fishing and hunting and all that kind of stuff we did. But I also started playing guitar when I was about 9. One of my uncles lived across the pasture on the farm. And so I'd have my guitar and I'd take my guitar in the case and walk across the pasture. And he had buddies over to play music, a bunch of high school friends and stuff. And I would go and he taught me how to play the bass first because he needed somebody to play. And so I did that. And I was like, this isn't fun. I want to be one of the guys playing guitar. So I started doing that. And I've been playing since I was about 9, and I won't say how old I am now, but it's been a long time, 30 plus years. So, and then, so grew up loving music and all that stuff. My parents were faithful to take us to church. I'm a living a testimony of Proverbs 22:6, train a child up in the way they should go. When they're old, they won't depart from it. But I'm also a testimony of the fact that there may be a point when that child is on their own that they try to do things their own way. And then, but you know, the proof that God still loves and that God can still restore and redeem and bring back. And so, that's how I grew up, and I ended up marrying a girl that I went to high school with. She's a year older than me, and we weren't really friends. We knew each other in school, but it's kind of a long story of how we ended up being married. But when I came back to the Lord, really came to the Lord for the first time when I was 19. I became a Christian. And even though I grew up in church, dad was a deacon, parents were Sunday school teachers. I went off and did my own thing when I got to college. And I was pledging a fraternity and just doing all the stuff that goes along with that. And my goal, I was in college to do a communication arts degree, interpersonal, intercultural communication, that kind of stuff. But that was the backup plan. The first frontline main idea was to make it in the music industry as like a red dirt. Now they call it red dirt. In the 2000s, 90s, they didn't call it that. It was just Texas country or alt country. And so I was writing songs and playing at some bars and stuff like that. And that was my goal. I wanted to make it. And one night I came back from my apartment. I don't remember how I got home. You know, I woke up at 5 o'clock the next afternoon, just hungover, sick, puke everywhere. And I was miserable, man. This is what I thought. I didn't grow up doing that stuff, but that's what I thought this lifestyle encapsulated. I thought this is the people who welcomed me in when I got to college were these kind of people. So this is who I am now. And I remember just being so miserable. And it wasn't the first time. I'd had that experience multiple times where I was just miserable and like, why am I doing this? But that day I was the most miserable I'd ever been. And 5 o'clock in the afternoon in my apartment by myself, I just said, and it wasn't as a prayer, it was almost like just talking out loud. I said, God, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I doing this? And like, I've had a couple times in life where it may not have been a voice, but it might as well have been of God just saying, this is why, speaking to me. And God pretty much just told me, you're doing this because you're doing all these things to live up to these other people's expectations and their standard, their definition of who you should be. But you were raised right. You know what you're supposed to do. You just have chosen not to do that. Uh, Give your life to me and see what I do with it. And I was so miserable at the time. I said, "Fine, God, you can have it. I'll follow. I'll do whatever you want." And I'll tell you this: I won't say the fraternity because I don't want to get in trouble, or the college, but we grew marijuana in the back room of the frat house. We had huge parties every Thursday night. I mean, you name it, we did it. And that day was the last time I partook in any of that. I'm no desire that my desires instantly changed. And so I look at that as the day that I accepted Christ. I walked an aisle, got baptized when I was 10, but it was more like living out my parents' faith instead of mine. But that was the day that I had faith. It started right then. I mean, I'll tell you, saying yes to God was a great thing because about 2 weeks later, I'd spent all my money. So I came back to Bonham on the weekends, and I was the town where I live, where I grew up, and I would work trying to make money. My aunt and uncle had a quick lube, changing oil and stuff. So I'd work in the pit, burning my arms and everything, and changing oil. And my mom came to visit me about a week or two after this incident with the Lord happened, and she said, "Hey, there's this guy that's looking to hire an intern," and I was like, "Okay." She's like, "Church intern." I was like, "Well, that ain't for me." And she's like, "Well, he wants somebody to play guitar, and you know the guy. He grew up going to the church with us. He's older than me, but." And she's like, he wants you to apply." And I said, "Does he know kind of what I've been doing for the last year or two?" She goes, "Yeah." He said, "Just apply anyway." So I applied, and 2 weeks later, I had the job. 2 weeks after that, we go to uh, youth camp. My first thing, I'm a youth and music intern. So I go to youth camp as a sponsor. And long story, but God called me to ministry while I was there on Wednesday night, while I was at camp as one of the adults. I ended up walking the aisle. And there's a big, long story to that. But then the very next day, I'm sitting there talking. They had hired a guy and a girl intern. And this girl comes and sits beside me while I'm playing basketball with some of the kids. And I'm like worn out. I used to be like almost 300 pounds. I was big. And so I'm worn out. She comes and sits beside me, and she starts asking me about a call to ministry. And then we talked for like 2 hours, and then she prays for me at the end. And when we got done, I was like, I've never had a girl like come up and like be spiritually mature like that and say, "Can I pray for you? I'm so proud of you." I was like, that's the kind of girl I want to marry. And Helton, I'm going to tell you, 2 years later, I did marry that girl. And we've been married since 2004. We have 2 kids. Connor is a junior, does basketball, baseball, tennis. My daughter Cammie, she's a freshman. She plays volleyball and does cheerleading. My wife plays bass in our praise band at church. I play electric, acoustic sometimes, and sing. I'm the youth pastor at our church, and my son plays drums. He's been playing drums live at church since he was about 10 years old. Very gifted musician, and man, I'm just blessed. I'm blessed. There's me. I know that's a long, long roundabout way to get in there, but I tried to actually bring it down and make it shorter.
No, brother, that is perfect. Okay, I think we're good. We can close the podcast. That is a perfect beginning and ending to it. I mean, just that testimony, that story is amazing of God's grace and mercy over your life, and it's a story of redemption. Obviously, it's a great way to begin a conversation that we're going to unpack so much. But so you are into ministry right now, and at one point you now become a pastor. You go into ministry. So what is that like, and how did you get into the fire service? How did those two lives merge?
Yeah, so for 7 years, I was a full-time pastor. I did youth and music at four different churches. Three of them were established churches, and then one was a church plant. So we actually went and did a church plant. I know you have some experience with this, Elton, where you had to set up and tear down every single week. And so we did, full band, lights, projectors, mic the drums, all that stuff, the stage. And we had to set that, we had to set the stage up, and we had a portable stage. We had to set all this up and tear it down. And we actually did it in a place called Jumping Land. And so it was one of those, an indoor bounce house thing. So we got really good at rolling up because they were like, you can use it. They let us rent this big building so we could set up several hundred chairs. And we grew. We were in 2 or 3 locations, but we ended up there as the biggest location we had. And so we had to roll up the bounce houses every Saturday night. We go up there Saturday. They closed at 5 o'clock on Saturday. So we would go at about 6 o'clock, roll up all the bounce houses out of the way and move them to the walls, set all of our stuff up, sound check, make sure everything works. and then run through the songs. So that's the only time we had to practice, right? Because all of our stuff, sound stuff, is there in a closet. So we'd set up, we'd practice on Saturday night, run through the songs. Then all of the praise band would, and all the people set up. We'd go out to eat together at like 9 o'clock on Saturday night, then show up on Sunday. And at 12, we had to have everything back up. So we'd do our service at 10, be done about 11:15. And at noon, you couldn't tell it wasn't a bounce house room. Like all the bounce houses were back up. And we may have tested out some of the big bounce houses and slides before we left, because you got to make sure they work, you know. So we did that for several years, and 7 years total. I was in full-time youth and music ministry, took kids to camp, office hours, all that stuff. And then I had an incident once when I was at my very first church, where I had two elderly gentlemen who came to me mad that I wasn't in the office enough. And this isn't every church, but it is some churches. And they said, "Where were you Tuesday? You were gone for you took your 2.5 hour lunch break." And I was like, "Well, I spent an hour and a half at the school. I went to the junior high on Tuesdays right down the road from our church and hung out with the kids, invited kids to church. And it's a blessing. I was invited to be in the school, but the principals would come, the coaches would come. We ended up having some teachers and coaches and principals come because of relationships that were built there. So I'd sit through lunch and I'd sit at the coaches table and hang out with them and sit with the kids. And then I'd do the same thing at the high school on Wednesday. But because of that, my lunch was like, I was gone for 2 or 3 hours a day, because I'd do that. And then I'd have a 30-minute lunch and come back. Well, they were mad. They're like, "We're paying you to sit in the office, not to play with kids." And I'm like, "I'm the youth pastor, like that's my job." They're like, "No, it's not." So I know that's not every church, but that kind of frustrated me. And in my mind, I'd had this deal like, the Apostle Paul talked about that he didn't want to be a burden to the churches, so he kind of did some other things. He was a tent maker and he did other things. And of course, churches did support his missionary journeys, but there's times where he just kind of plants and makes tents, does some other things. He works with Priscilla and Aquila, and he does some other things like that. And that appealed to me, but I was like, well, but God's called me to this, so I can't do anything else. Fast forward about 7 years of that, I'm at a church, and my son Connor's born. He's about 6 months old. And the guy who actually counseled me when I surrendered to ministry at that camp, he was a youth pastor then. He was at his first church as pastor, and it's in the town I grew up in. And I wasn't in the town anymore. I was a different town. But he met with me one day and said, "I want you to come on staff and help us with our outreach, media, music, some of that stuff." And I was like, "Oh, okay, how much are you going to pay?" Not that that's the main thing, but I've got a wife and a kid now. He's like, "Oh, it's part time." And I was like, he told me the number, and I was like, "I can't live on that." And he goes, "Oh, just go to fire school. You'll love it." And I was like, who does that? Who tells somebody, like, "I want you to come work for me, but I really want you to work doing something else. And then, but I want you to be here all the time, but do that." Well, he was a firefighter, a full-time firefighter and a pastor. He'd never been full-time firefighter. He'd never been a full-time pastor. He'd always been bi-vocational. He did construction for a while, then fire service. This is all he knew. And so he didn't understand why I was hesitant, because he's like, "That's what I do. Like, that's all I've ever done." I was like, "Well, I've never done that. I've always just been a pastor." So he asked me, he said, "Would you just pray about it?" Well, that was the kicker. So I said, "Oh yeah, fine. I'll pray about it." Well, within about 2 months, I was on staff at his church looking for something to do. So I signed up for fire school. My granddad actually retired from Dallas Fire Department. He spent 30 years there. Retired, made engineer 3 or 4 years in, and never took another promotional exam. So I was like, that sounds like a good plan. So I was like, I'll try it. And the goal was, Helton, to just be a firefighter long enough till the church grows. My first Sunday, the church had like 40 people in it. So there wasn't any money to pay me, but that was the goal. Do that long enough until the church grows enough to pay me to be a full-time pastor again. And so I went to fire school, went to EMT, paramedic, did all that. I worked at Bonham, the city where I live and where our church is a little bit smaller town. I worked there for about a year, doing 3 12s a week. So they didn't want me doing more than 40 hours, because then they have to give me benefits. But I could do 3 12s a week and just get hourly rates. And then, man, I did event videography to help pay the bills. I worked at the Quick Lube again. I mean, I've got a bachelor's degree from a prestigious liberal arts school, and I'm changing oil again, on Saturdays. And then I had a band at one point for about 2 or 3 years. We traveled and did camps, did youth camps and stuff like that. And so we did that weeks and weeks and weeks out of the summer. And the last year we did that was that summer I was in fire school. So my son was a year old, less than a year old. We had multiple camps that we're doing. I'm in fire school during the day, so I had to limit the camps. And I went in the summer, which was dumb. I mean, Texas in the summer, fire academy. I mean, it was ridiculously hot, and the burn days were miserable. I mean, it was, but it prepared me. I was like, this is going to be. I can do this if I can make it through the academy on these burn days. I can fight fire. This is rough, and but I ended up doing that, and I told my wife, I was like, I would get up at 5 in the morning and run, and then I would go do a jog because we didn't do PT every day at academy. Some of the classroom days we just didn't. We just mainly stayed in the classroom. But I get up and jog because I'd lost like 70 pounds when my wife was pregnant with my son, and I couldn't tie my shoes, man, without getting out of breath. So I started working out again, and I always did. I played football and baseball and powerlifting, and so I was always into working out. But I just kept eating like I was playing football and all that stuff, and I wasn't anymore. So I started working out again, lost a bunch of weight. So I got up and I jog in the morning at 5 a.m. Then about 6, I would leave and drive 2 hours for fire school from the camps that I was like, we got to be within 2 hours of this where the fire school is for these camps. I can't go to any further than that. And I would spend all day in fire cat, burn days, whatever. I'd be back about 6. We'd run through the set list real quick, and at 7 we'd do worship. And then the next day and I did that for several weeks. It was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. My wife is like a single mom at this camp in a hotel room with a baby and a pack and play for weeks on end. It was brutal. So we decided not to do that anymore after that summer. But I got a job at Sherman, the department I work at now, and they hired me, and right around the time I was almost done with paramedic school, and so I got there and I was like, I can do this. I'll do this for a while. The plan was still to do it until the church had enough to pay me full time. Well, fast forward, I've been there 16 years on staff at that church. I've been at Sherman, the fire department, for 15 years. And man, I love it. I love both things. I didn't think that would happen. I thought the fire service would be a temporary placeholder just to pay the bills until I could be full time. Well, our churches, we have over 10 times the church attendance that we did when I started. So God's blessing us. We've had to move to 2 services because we just didn't have room. We had to bring in a portable building because we didn't have room for classes or anything. And so God's blessing our church, and have the money where I could probably swing doing that if I wanted to, but I don't really want to. I love the fire service. There's something about the brotherhood, the camaraderie, the family, and really, for me, I didn't see it as service when I started. You have the idea that this is public service because that's what our job is. We're public servants. But man, the last several years, I had some really wise, godly firefighters, officers. One particularly, but a couple other ones who invested in me and helped me understand. Like, look, this is ministry too. Like, I know you don't view it that way, but it is. You're as a pastor, there's times where you're coming to people in their worst day. They're coming to you on their worst day. And they're saying, Pastor, I don't know what to do. I need help. He said, in the fire service, you have people coming to you, calling you because they don't know who else to call. Like, they need help. And he said, this is a ministry. And he was a godly man, and named Jesse. And he kind of instilled that and reminded me that that's your purpose. Your purpose is still to serve, and it's not that different, and he said, I'm a Christian too. He said, and he's a lay pastor, elder at his church. And he said, I view this as my ministry, part of my ministry. He said, and if you'll view it like that, it'll change your perspective on the fire service. And so I've tried to do that, and it's become something I'm passionate about. As much as ministry at the church, I'm passionate about serving the citizens and the guys that I work with in the fire department.
And that is awesome, Colby. I love that you brought something that you loved first and something that you have grown to love to be your mission, your passion, and your goal. So how do you, a full-time pastor, full-time ministry, now turned firefighter, how do you marry these two different worlds to live out like now your new life, and how do you balance those two things together?
Man, there's a lot of aspects to that question. And good thing you like to talk and I like to talk because we can hash it all out. But there's several aspects. One is time. With our schedule, there are times I'm not there at the church. And we're blessed that we have quite a bit of time. We can build up comp time and we can trade and things like that. So things that I absolutely need to get off, I can get off. Like when I pick my vacations, we pick our vacations in October for the upcoming year. And so when we do that, I always pick 2 weeks. We have to pick a 4-shift block in the beginning, 2-week block in the first round of our picks by seniority. And at first I couldn't do it. I'd have to trade, but I've got enough seniority now that if I want to be off Christmas, I can usually get off then, but I usually pick it in the summer, and I just pick off 2 weeks. And one of those is when we go to youth camp, and the other one is when we do a family vacation. So we've gone to youth camp for 6 days. And last year we took 80 kids to youth camp, and then came back on Saturday and left out on Sunday night to go on vacation. So it's like, do your laundry and leave. This year we're actually going to Honduras. We went to Honduras and a couple weeks earlier this last year on a 10-day mission trip. We're going on a 7-day mission trip this year. And it's like back to back with it in camp. So we're going to leave on Saturday, come back on Saturday, then leave on Monday to go to youth camp, take 80 kids again to youth camp. So it's going to be, that part is rough for me, is the scheduling, and at first I felt really guilty, man, to be honest, about missing church because of the fire service. Again, I'd never missed, and growing up, I remember one time I missed a Sunday night church when I was about 16 because my cousin and I were fishing on Sunday afternoon after church, lost track of time. He got his truck stuck. I pulled him out of 4-wheel drive. I pulled him out. And by the time we got back to the house, it was like 6 when church started. And we're like, well, there's no point going. This was pre-cell phone. The house phone rang at like 6:05. And I don't think we had caller ID even, but I answered the phone. It was my mom calling from the church. Where are you? So I'm trying to tell her. She's like, I don't want to hear the story. I just wanted to, you're at home. I was like, well, yeah, you called home. I mean, duh. Well, that wasn't the right response, So when she gets home, my keys get taken away. So my junior year during football season, I get dropped off in the minivan with the sliding door for 2 weeks, by my mom. There's no greater shame, for a 16, 17-year-old boy than to be back in the minivan, So, so that's how much we were in church then. And that was just ingrained in me. And so I felt guilty missing for the fire department for shift work. But the other thing it did, though, the good thing it did is it created an opportunity for me to let students and some other adults kind of step in and teach on Wednesday nights, like when I do youth stuff, and on Sunday mornings too. I play in the praise band and play guitar and sing. And so it gave and I lead a lot, but it created some opportunity for other people to rotate in and have some opportunities to lead. And then on Wednesdays, I have 4 or 5 students who feel called to ministry, my son being one of them. And so they'll kind of rotate through teaching on some Wednesday nights, and they don't have to do it every week, but they get to do it occasionally. And so something that you look at as a negative initially of having to balance that has turned into a positive, where it's given other people opportunity to lead, and me an opportunity to kind of mentor them and guide them, and like, okay, what went good on Wednesday night, what went bad? Yeah, how did this story work? How did oh, your message was only 5 minutes and you had an hour block. Okay, how can we make that better? Because kids are running around for 50 minutes with no supervision because we're done. That's not good. So how can we, maybe play a game, give me an opportunity to mentor some of those guys in that. But man, the other thing side of it is the difficulty in the fire service for me. When I started working, the first place I applied at was this place I was working PRN. I applied to be there in the town I grew up in. That's the only place I really wanted to work in the fire department, because I was thinking that's where my pastor had worked at, and I was thinking he can just get on the brush truck and come to church on Sunday morning, and he would come and show up in his uniform and preach in his in his blues, and I was like, that'd be awesome. I could come and just play. This would be great. And I applied at that department. I spent a year there. They did a written test, and I wrote number 1. And I was like, oh, no problem. And they do all this process, and then they come back and say, you're number 3. And I'm like, I passed everything, and I was 1 on the written. How did I become number 3? Well, come to find out, on the interview board, they had someone who said, quote, we done got one preacher here, and the last thing we need's another one, end quote. So I ended up getting docked regardless of what my answers were, because they didn't think I would fit in with them because I was a pastor. They thought I would be aloof. I don't know what they thought. So I end up number 3, and then they're fixing to hire me there when I get a job offer where I currently work. And it was more money where I work. It's only a 30-minute drive from my house, bigger city. And so I get there, and I don't know anybody. Like I'd never met anybody that worked there. Had no idea who anybody was. And for the first several months, man, I was really intimidated because they knew I was a pastor. They knew that's what all I'd done. And so there were some people that wouldn't be themselves because I was in the room, right? So that makes you feel bad because you know they're not being themselves. And then there were other people that would go over the top vulgarity just to test me. You know what I mean? And you probably understand that firemen do this. If they know that, if they think that they can get to you in some way, and a lot of times it's not mean hearted. It's just like brothers messing with each other. You know, if they know that's something that's going to bother you, they're going to pick at you. And so those guys would do that. And man, if I'd been a welder for 7 years and then went to the fire service, if I'd been a mechanic for 7 years, it might not have been that different, but being a pastor in an office, you know, during the week most of the time, or hanging out with the senior adults for their, you know, card games or, you know, like that kind of stuff, going from there to a fire station table, totally different, you know. And, but, you know, I grew up in a locker room playing sports, all that stuff around farmers and stuff. So I wasn't anything they could say that was going to offend me, but it was just, I wasn't used to it. You know, been so long since I've been around that. And so, pretty quickly though, they realized that and I would tell them if they, some of them would come in and say something they shouldn't say and then say, "Oh, sorry, I forgot you're here." And I'm like, "Why are you apologizing to me? I'm not anybody's judge. You know, I mess up. My sins may not be the same, but they're not any better or any worse. I mean, I'm a sinner just like everybody else. So y'all, I need grace and forgiveness just like y'all." So it created kind of a unique opportunity even to share the gospel, you know, when people apologizing for that. And so they realized pretty quickly that if they're cussing, I'm not going to call them out. If they're talking about stuff like that, I may not participate, but I'm not going to call them out because that's, if you're a believer, if you're an open, devout Christian and you're talking like that, it is my job to call you out. If you're not, that's not my job. You're just acting like somebody who didn't know Jesus. My job is to pray for you and to try to show Jesus to you, not to judge you, because that's not my job. So within a year or two, that they kind of welcomed me in and accepted me, you know, where I'm just one of the guys, you know, and they'll still sometimes they'll give me like, "Oh, he probably hadn't heard this before." And I'm like, "Try me. I was in college. I was in a fraternity. I played football. I mean, just, I've heard it, you know what I mean?" And so they'll still mess with me every now and then, but it's good. It's good. And, that transition was hard at first, but, and there's still challenges with it, you know, with the time, especially trying to figure out. I'm really involved in my church that's growing and things around our community, but I'm also really involved at the fire department. I do peer support. I'm the team lead for our peer support team. They sent me to chaplaincy training. I do some teaching, and so I'm on the board for our local association. I'm one of the executive board members for that. So there's a lot of time invested in the fire service, but I think it's a worthwhile cause. So I don't mind. You know, one of the things that I'm big on is it's okay to invest time in something that's worthwhile. You know, the problem is a lot of times we invest in things that are not worthwhile and they become a priority. It's okay to prioritize things that are worthy causes. And I think investing in the guys, the mental health, the rights and wages and the things that we argue for in the association too, I think those are worthwhile. So I don't mind investing in those things because they're worthwhile causes.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the topic of priority because, as you know, my podcast is called The First Things First. And as you already talked about, you have ministry full-time, now part-time. You have the fire department who's now full-time. And you also have another very important part of your life, which is your wife and your kids. So how do you put all three of these things together, and how do you prioritize those three things? Was there any point in your career that those priorities got out of order, and how did you deal with that?
Those things get out of order on a regular basis around our house. I'm just going to be honest. And I have a godly wife who is bold in her faith and is bold in calling me out. And some people don't need that. Some people can take a little nudge like, hey, you might ought to think about this. And some people just need, hey, you need to do this, and the bold are the slight nudges. It takes a lot of those for me to kind of understand the significance of what they're saying, but the quick, bold, hey, you need to do this. I need that. Like that's the kind of, I mean, God knew what he was doing when he put us together because I'm not super organized, more creative and less organized brain, she's the exact opposite. Well, she's creative too, but she's very organized. And so there's been times when I was not as bold, in my faith and not as bold in a lot of things. But the longer we've been married, the more she's kind of rubbed off on me in a good way. Um, I'd like to think that I've rubbed off on her on kind of the letting some of those things that are not important go, but I don't know how much it's worked. But it is a challenge, balancing the time. I had a guy call me last night. We're doing a men's conference at church, at a church I'm speaking at this next weekend, and one of the guys who's speaking called me just to ask a question about something, we're at a basketball game, my son's basketball game. He's a varsity basketball player, but he had been in the game, and then they pulled him out for a breather. Right. And so the guy texted me while he's playing. Well, I didn't respond back. Well, when he goes out, I went out of the gym, sat there looking through the glass so I could still watch when he's coming back in. And I called him. And this is a guy who I uh, respect. He's a chief in another department who's a godly man who I've got to be good friends with. And man, he's just so encouraging, and he gives me wisdom. And so I stepped out and I said, hey man, I'm just calling you back. He goes, you sound like you're at a gym, in a gym. I said, well, I am. He said, is your one of your kids playing? I said, yeah, Connor's playing. He goes, why are you calling me? I was like, well, he just subbed out. He said it was just a quick phone call, so I'm good. He said, don't ever call me again, when your son's playing. And I was like, that's probably right. I probably shouldn't have. Now, in my defense, he was on the bench, and I was watching to see when he came back in, and so we only talked a couple minutes, but stuff like that is difficult for me sometimes because this was an important thing because it's a ministry thing, right? So sometimes the fire service is important, ministry is important, but if I fail at that first job as husband, father, I'm going to suck at those other two jobs. I mean, it doesn't matter how good a firefighter, a fire captain I am, a paramedic, none of that matters. It doesn't matter how good a pastor I am if the ministry to my family fails. And man, I forget that sometimes. But like I said, I've got a wife that reminds me. I have some godly men around me who can remind me, which is really important because I think all of us can get lost in. It's not even doing bad things. It's lost in doing good things. For me, like I don't have a lot of bad habits. I don't think, but I do have a lot of habits. I'm big into music. I'm big into uh, outdoor stuff, and then when you combine that with um, fire service, which takes a lot of time, and ministry, which takes a lot of time, and two high school kids doing, 2 or 3 nights a week, we're watching sports or doing whatever. My wife's involved. She's a school counselor, so she has a kind of stressful job too. And so um, when you combine all that, it's easy to get lost and forget what your priorities are. But I can tell you the days that my priorities start right are the days that I start with scripture reading and prayer. And the days where, you think it's silly or it's cliche to say, but the days that I don't start off that way are the days where my priorities lose focus, right? The days where they get a little bit off balance. And I really just think it's because the first priority is my relationship with the Lord. If that's good, then my relationship with my wife will be better. My relationship with my kids will be better. My relationship with the guys at work will be better. My relationship with the people at church will be better. But if I neglect that, even for a day or two, then it's going to be messed up. I remember Bruce Hornsby, a famous piano player, musician, years ago said, if I don't practice one day on the piano, I can tell. If I don't practice 2 days, my wife can tell. If I don't practice 3 days, my fans can tell. And I think the same thing's true with our faith, with our walk with the Lord. If we don't have that time with the Lord one day, I can tell, like, man, why my days seem so weird today? What is wrong? Well, how did I start it? I didn't start it right. And then the same way, you get a couple days in, if you miss a couple days, my wife is like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you acting like this? Well, because I'm not where I should be. So, I think it's hard to balance, but, and I'm not great at it, by any means, but, it's something I'm working at, and it's something I'm, trying to prioritize. My family, and my family's so plugged in church that there's times that we do those things together. Mission trip, ministry. Like I said, my son and daughter help teach sometimes, and so my wife does sometimes when I'm not there. So that's still kind of family time, but we have to be careful with it though, because it is family time, but it's also so many other people there too that we can't have the same kind of conversations that we'd have at home. So we have to be real careful to try to make sure that we have some of that family time every week, even if it's just we try to sit around the dinner table several times a week. And there's times, like my son last night didn't get home till 10 because they had an away basketball game. We wouldn't watch the game. Of course, he got home an hour after we did. So days like that, we're not going to sit down and eat, because I'm not eating at 10 o'clock at night. Not going to happen. But I'm ready for bed, and my wife's already in bed, but she's in bed by 9 usually if we don't have a ball game. So, but the nights that we can, we all still sit and eat together. We'll sit around the table, talk about our day. We'll talk about uh, what was good that happened, what was bad that happened. Like, everybody kind of goes around. We'll share that. It's one of the things we like to do. Your high low. I don't know if you talked about that. I've heard somebody say that before. Like, you do a high low at the dinner table, right? We do that. It's one of the things my wife does with kids, counseling elementary kids, is tell me one good thing that happened today and one bad thing. Well, we implement that at our dinner table. So, and that sparks conversation. And then one of the things that we do, and I got this from my pastor, is we try to have the kids text us a scripture every day. Like, what? We're paying for your cell phone. If you want to keep it, like, there's a lot of bad things that you can get into on here. There's a lot of good things you can get into on here. We want to make sure that you're investing in at least one good thing a day. So you need to text us a scripture every day that you've read from your quiet time, from your daily verse thing, something. Text us a scripture every day, and that's your payment. That's your lease on your phone. As long as you do that, you can have a phone. If you go a couple days missing, we're gonna have a conversation. Because it tells us you're probably not reading your Bible, because it doesn't take much to copy and paste and send a text. It doesn't take long. So if you're not doing it, it means that you probably haven't read your Bible that day. So there's some things like that we've tried to do to try to instill those priorities with them too.
Yeah, I love that. Teach your children in the way it should be, and they shall not depart from you. You said it earlier on the beginning, and I think that's beautiful. And it shows your intentionality of keeping the first things first, which I think it's probably the reason why you put this book together that I want to talk about. For those that are on video, this is the case. The cover right here. The book is Lead Like a Real Man. So can you talk to us a little bit about what led you into writing this book, and what kind of stuff do you get into in the book that you want to share with everybody?
Well, what led to it, like I said, I've been in church for, gosh, about 24 years. I've been on staff at churches since I was 19 years old. The summer when I was 19, when I finished my freshman year of college, and I have I've had a pretty good view of the church. I've been at big churches, small churches, church plants, all these different styles. And one thing that I noticed in church is a lack of, not maybe men attending, but men who are plugged in serving. So, for example, if you look at most churches, I know in the United States and probably all over, when you look at who teaches, kids especially, elementary kids, stuff like that, it's usually women. If you're a church that does vacation Bible school, which tons of churches do that, some of it may be because of the scheduling, because some churches do it during the day when people are working or whatever. But typically, 80-90% of the workers are ladies, not men. But in the household, in a lot of these kids today's household, what are they lacking in their household? Usually, if they're lacking a parent, it's usually lacking a man, right? That's usually who they're lacking. And then they come to church, and who are they not getting invested in by? men because there's not enough of them plugged in to serve. They may be at church on Sundays, but they're not there serving in all these different areas. So I've seen that for years and years, man. And then in the fire service, our department is all men. We have a really hard physical agility test, and we've only had one lady ever pass it, and she ended up getting a job offer somewhere else before we had an opening. So it's all men still. And so when I see our guys and so many other departments, I've had opportunities to teach for like a statewide organization. I taught at a leadership symposium a few weeks ago and stuff. And one of the things that I see is this desire for leadership. Like all these classes and all the Jocko's books, and we have all these different books, Simon Sinek, and all these secular people teaching us how to be leaders. And so we have this deal where we're leadership and not enough men. And when I look at the fire department, I see a lot of men who also have the same kind of mentality that they have at church. I'll show up, but I'm not going to plug in and serve. Like I'll show up to get my paycheck, sure, but I'm not going above and beyond. Like I'm doing the bare minimum to get my paycheck and get to retirement. And some guys are that way because they've got 30 years, which I think still isn't a valid excuse. Some guys are doing that at year 2. They get off probation and they're already on, RIP, retired in place. They're already there. And so I see these two different deals, and I'm like, maybe this is the same problem. Maybe this apathy is it's here in the fire service, and it's here too. And it's obviously maybe not a faith-based thing. I was thinking initially at first, but then I was like, you know what? Maybe it is. Because if you're a believer and you believe that God has called you to serve other people, right? And we are, called to love God and love others. Jesus asked the greatest 2 commands: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. The prophet, the law, all the prophets and the law hang on these 2 commands. So loving others we do that by serving them, by putting ourselves last and putting them first. Jesus said that. Jesus demonstrated that. So I'm sitting there going, at church, they don't understand how to serve because they don't understand how to love. At the fire department, I wonder if they're not understanding how to serve because they don't understand how to love the way God calls us to love. And so I was thinking about this, and in the middle of all this, the last year or two, I've started working on my master's again. I went to seminary and worked on a Master of Arts in Christian Education years ago, and now I'm working on a Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. And so I'm reading all these secular books for this degree and all this stuff, and I'm reading all these other books by secular leaders who are great books. I love the principles there, but I'm going, man, most of these principles I think are in Scripture. Like I think everything they're saying has a basis in Scripture. What if I could look at manhood and how we should lead from a biblical perspective, and make a book that's short enough that a dumb fireman would read it, and put a lot of Scripture in it, tell a few fire department stories, tell a few church stories, because those are the 2 areas that I have experience in, and just challenge people to love God, love their families, and train others to do the same. And that's really the focus: is knowing and loving Jesus, loving our families the way Christ loves the church, the way He's called us to, selflessly, sacrificially, and then training other men to do the same thing. And that was the focus of the book, and that's why I wrote it. And honestly, some of those things are things I told you earlier that I struggle with some of that stuff with time and with priority and things. And so it's like, what are things that I need to do better at? And then as we started going through, I started writing. I was like, if these are things I'm struggling at, it's things probably other guys are struggling with too. So maybe if it's applicable to me, it's applicable to somebody else too.
Colby, I think that what you just explained was exactly what I felt like when I started writing my book, when I started my podcast. It wasn't because I had the answers to all these questions that guys are having. It was because I had questions looking for the answers. And so I just started writing things down and just wanted to share with other people, share with other firefighters, share with other believers some of the lessons that I was learning. And if I could help somebody avoid those pitfalls, avoid those mistakes, I think it would be worth taking the time to put pen to paper and write some of these things down. And I think that like me, you have the desire to encourage and equip people to be better, to do better, to lead better, whether as a husband, whether as a firefighter. It's just a desire that we have in us to help people, and with that, with the book as well, you also have a podcast that's called Call to Lead. So can you talk a little bit about the podcast and the conversations that you have on your podcast, which also includes not just firefighters but other people in a position of leadership?
I jumped on the podcast bandwagon back in the summer, and it seems like you get online, it seems like there's tons of podcasts these days, firefighters and different, just all kind of things, which is great. I mean, it's great to have a platform, and that's what I've said is that it doesn't matter if it's one person or 1,000 people or whoever hears it. What I want to do is give someone an opportunity that might not otherwise have it to share their story of how God is blessing them, how God is using them, how God has ministered to them and worked in their lives. Because I think that's always a good story to share, And so, initially I was starting off kind of in line with my degree. So I wanted to do leadership because I was getting real into leadership stuff and leadership training and leadership planning and all of that. And so I was like, I kind of want to do this, but I don't know how much I want it to be. I'm already preaching and I'm doing that stuff all the time. This may be an avenue to explore more of fire service and just public service in general. And, but man, I had the first conversation I had was with my pastor who spent 20 years, and just retired to be a full-time pastor just a year and a half ago. Yeah. He left. He was a battalion chief, in another department, worked his way up to battalion chief, and then did that several years, then retired because the church was ready for him to be full-time and he was ready to do something else. And so we made him full-time. So I talked with him about just kind of the same things we're talking about. How do you bridge that gap between fire service and church service? And he's got two sons that are just, they grew up all the way. I was able to be the youth pastor from the time they're 7th grade till they graduated, and they're both out of college now and just godly men. And so I was just talking with him. He's the guy that gave me the idea about have your kids text you the scripture every day. That's something him and his wife do with his kids. And I was like, that obviously worked out well for them, So we had, I had several people like that I was talking to initially, but the people I was talking to, I didn't want to talk to people who were probably obvious unbelievers. I just was like, we just won't get into a lot of scripture stuff. Well, the people I'm interviewing, I interviewed a guy who's another pastor I know who is a sheriff's deputy and a police officer for years and years. After he was in Iraq, 2001, interesting story. He's a friend of mine. He went to, graduated high school and then didn't know what to do. So in June or July of 2001, he's like, I'll just go do the reserves and then they'll pay for my education. So he went to the Army Reserves. About couple weeks after he finished basic, 9/11 happened. And the guy who's the recruiter was like, you'll never do anything. Well, that wasn't true. He ended up doing several tours. And matter of fact, he was home for one of his kids being born. He was not home for the other kid. So he came home to a wife who'd rearranged the house and a new kid that he never met, so it's just, and then he went to police academy and did that for years and years. Now he's a pastor. And so these stories, the people who I was looking up to and who I was wanting to tell their story, man, Jesus was all over their story. And so after a couple of weeks, I was like, you know what, forget it. We're just going to talk about Jesus, because he's ultimately the greatest leader that we've ever had, the greatest example we've ever had. And so I'm not opposed to having other people on, but they're going to hear about Jesus. If they don't bring it up themselves, I'll bring it up, So I was like, you know what? God's given me this platform. This is obviously the direction he's pushing it in. So we're just going to run with it. Those doors are open in that way. So that's how we're going to do it. So I've had, coaches like the guy who's a Fellowship of Christian Athletes regional coordinator for North Texas on, and, talked about his coaching career and how God's allowed him to invest in young men's lives as a coach. Another guy who's a retired, who's pretty much the undersheriff, the highest unelected position in Collin County, which is one of the largest population counties in the state of Texas, in the Metroplex. He did 38 years in law enforcement, and then God called him to help run this homeless shelter, and he's like, I thought I was done. I didn't, and I did that for 38 years. And I've only to realize this is what his calling was on my life, was this. I didn't realize it till 38 years of doing what I wanted to do, that this is what he really wanted for me. And so just people getting to share their story, that's really what I want to do. And it ends up being a lot of manly men kind of people, like firefighters and police and coaches and things like that. But so I've had a guy who's a city manager on talking about his faith and how that led him through different careers and led him to be successful in what he did. And just leadership. I try to, every time I try to get somebody to share at least one leadership lesson that they've learned. And some of that is stuff that's come out in the book too, things that I'm going to be honest, I've stolen some points from people that they've given, and I've given credit where credit is due, but anything I know that's good has come from somebody else. Probably it's something I've learned from someone else. And if it's something I've learned the hard way, I was probably warned about it before and didn't listen, and then learned it myself, but they already told me, so, yeah.
Well, don't you worry, man. I'm definitely already stealing some stuff from you that you told me. I have timestamps here, stuff that I'll be taking and applying to my life. In my podcast, just like yours, man, it started as something and it molded into just having conversations with people sharing their stories. When I started the First Things First, it was really heavily focused on mental health, wellness, resilience, and just naturally the things that we live for and that we love just ends up coming up in conversation. So the First Things First today is a lot more about living out our purpose, living a life fully devoted to Christ, and just encourage people to do that. And man, I definitely, if your show was on Netflix, I definitely binged your show when I first found out. I had it on, every time I was working out, whenever I was driving somewhere. So I haven't listened to all the shows, but I definitely listened to quite a few of them, and it's really exciting, man. Our paths they're different in a way, but they're very similar. Both obviously love God, love people. We love to serve God and serve people. In our direction, it seems like it's going the same. So I hope we get to have a lot more of these conversations. And man, I'm super excited that we met and that this relationship is started. And so I want to now just throw some questions at you that you can take as long or as short as you want, and then I have some rapid fire questions for you at the end. So, and this is the first time that I'm doing this. So you are
guinea pig
to these questions.
Yeah.
And so I'm just gonna hit you with the first time you set foot in the firehouse.
Intimidating. It's pretty intimidating. When you walk into a firehouse, it's a weird place if you've never done it before, because you're coming into a place. If you've ever been to a family reunion or a birthday party, any kind of, and no one, and there's all these inside jokes and nicknames and all this, and you're just like, I don't even know what they're talking about, and I remember the first time I worked at where I work now. Of course, you do a couple weeks of days, the day training, learning, getting your logins, doing skills, doing all that stuff, getting training. And then first day on shift, I got there an hour early. I went and started checking off equipment, did all that stuff. I go to sit around the kitchen table, and we were told, don't sit until you get invited to sit. And in our department, you don't sit in a recliner until they invite you to. So you may spend 6 months, they're in, everybody else in a recliner, and you're sitting at the kitchen table with the book open, just even if you're not reading, sit at the kitchen table with the book open, and you might have your phone snuck in there or something, but have the book open. And but I remember going in the first day, and so I knew not to sit down, so I'm just standing. I introduced myself, went shook hands with everybody, and introduced myself, and they're asked a few questions or whatever, and talked for a minute. And then once the introductions are done, they're back. They're a family talking, and I'm like, the new adopted kid he's just looking around, I'm technically in the family, but not really, so it's like, I don't really know these people. I don't know who I could talk to. I don't know, what their backgrounds are. It's pretty intimidating. But it's also very welcoming. Once you're there, it doesn't take very long. We spend so much time together, this, and anybody listening who, a lot of firefighters and families and stuff, that you spend so much time together, you learn each other quickly, and some of that is good because you get to eat dinners together and cook together and work out together and all that stuff. Some of it's because one of the quickest ways to bond is over shared trauma and vicarious trauma or the visual trauma, the things we see, the things we go through. Um, it's part of it. I mean, it's not a part that we like about the job, but it is part of it, and it's a significant part. I know I've had guys who I probably wouldn't have gotten along with outside of the fire service, or wouldn't have been friends with, wouldn't have wanted to hang out with. Um, and even in the department was like, oh, I got to ride with this guy again today, whatever. I've had a few of those, not many, but a few. But when you work a CPR together, when you fight a structure fire together, when you go to that shooting together, whatever it is, when you have that shared trauma and that shared experience, some of that other stuff just starts to not matter as much. Like you realize this is my brother. Just like in real life, there's times growing up that me and my brother would get in some fist fights. There may be some times with that with the brothers at the fire department. Not that we're fist fighting because you get fired for that now, but you just like, I've got to go out with this guy today. But deep down, when you know that if I'm down in the fire, they're pulling me out. They will not let me stay in there. They will do whatever. They'll sacrifice themselves to get me out of there, just like I would for them. Uh, Man, the Bible tells that love covers over a multitude of sins. When you love each other, you choose to look past those individual preferences and those personality conflicts that you have. And so um, that changed. But at first, man, I was super intimidated. But it didn't take long for that to go away.
All right, tell us the story about your first fire.
Man, I don't know if this is my very first one, but it's the first one that I remember vividly. I was a rookie. Another rookie was with me. And of course, I didn't get in the fire service until I was 29. Um, and so this kid with me was 19, and he'd been a volunteer for a couple of years. So he probably had more experience than I did. But the two of us are on the ambulance together, both paramedics riding the box. And we show up to a structure fire, and it's at a mental health group home. And so we show up. The captain we had was an older guy that was kind of borderline getting ready to retire. So we pull up and we're first in the front door. We're pulling the line. We see heavy smoke. We see flames kind of coming up under the eave of the house. So the front door's open, unlocked. So we open the door. They think everybody's out. So we're like, we're just fighting fire, right? We're not worried about search as much. We're going to search, but it's like, let's get the fire knocked down first because everybody's accounted for that should be in the house. They're all outside. And so we go in, and he's on the nozzle. I'm right behind him. So we push in, and we make it at 3 or 4 feet in. He turns around and just goes, "It's hot." I was like, "Yeah, it is." You train crawling, but you don't always crawl in the front door. You go in standing if you can, and you drop down to crawl when you have to. And so it's like, holy smokes, this is one of those times we're going to have to drop down and crawl. So we drop down. We advance a few more feet in, and it's heavy, heavy smoke banking down. So we can't see much, but we look up, and there's just the whole ceiling's orange. So it's like the lights are on, or like you're looking up at a sunset, but then you can see like some waving, through the smoke. And it's like, I think that's fire, So he's like, and I was like, hey, look up. And so he looks up and he just starts penciling it, give it a few pencils, wait a few seconds, nothing. Then he's like, all right, he just opens it up for 30 seconds, something, turns it off, nothing, still the same. And we're in there just a couple minutes, and he turns around and he goes, I'm hot. And I'm like, your ears, it's probably not a good thing that you wait till your ears start burning until you come out, but he's like, my ears are hot. I said, my ears are hot too. So he's like, let's back out. So we backed out, and our captain, he stood at the front door. He didn't advance. He didn't go in with us. He stood there. He didn't have a pack on. Man, he had a helmet on, his bunker gear, and he's like, you boys go inside. I'll stand here and hump hose. If you need something, holler at me, We're like, okay. So we're two rookies going in by ourselves. Probably not a good thing. I don't advise doing that. If you're an officer, don't do that. But we end up backing out, and we get back to the front yard, and he's like, man, that was hot. And I was like, yeah. And I look, and you can get Borks after you've been at the department for a year. But when you're a rookie, we all have the pull up shield, Well, his shield is like this, and it's yellow. It's like melted. And I've got holes in my hood. I've got where embers were dropping and burning through my hood. And he's like, that was hot. I was like, yeah, it was. I mean, we were only inside for a couple of minutes, and they ended up calling defensive, pretty quick, because The attic was fully involved. It had already burned through a couple of rooms by the time we went in. We went in the front, but it was mainly in the back, so it had already advanced to the front. So they called defensive till we had it knocked down, and then went in and mopped up. But that was my first real fire that I remember, and it was a doozy because you sit in the burn box in fire school, and in the academy, and you feel the heat, but like if it gets too hot, they're going to pull me out. They can't in the academy. They can't let us burn up because nobody had come back to school. So that you have somebody else looking out for you. But when you go in and it's just you, like we didn't have an officer with us. Usually now that's my job as officer. Like, all right, dummies, it's time to get out. Like I know y'all want to work, but we got to get out. We didn't have anybody to do that, and so it was like, oh my gosh, like we're like, what do we do? Do we come out? Do we go out? Do we stay? And finally, he was like, I'm hot. I was like, me too. Let's get out. That's my first fire that I remember.
Man, I had that same story to you when I was my first fire. I was on the nozzle, and I was pretty hot, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want the guy behind me to think that I was I was
Oh
just
yeah,
pansy not wanting to be in there. So I was sitting there for. And this was an exterior fire. It was a deck fire that caught the whole house on fire. And we are in between two different houses. Now the Charlie exposure is burning up, and I'm in between the two houses, protecting exposures and every once in a while putting fire on the main house. But it was hot. And so for like a couple minutes I'm sitting there. I finally tapped out and said, hey man, you got to switch with me because I'm getting hot. And as soon as he switched with me, he's like, dude, it's really hot. We got to back out. So I definitely know that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Last but not least, what do you believe that your calling and purpose in the fire service is?
I believe my calling. I look at it this way. I tell my guys, my first shift as an officer, I sat down with my guys and I said, "Here's my goal. You're going to do your job description." And I printed out the job description for the engineer, for mine as captain, for the firefighters. I said, "I want you to do these things. That's a given." I said, "But the other thing I want you to do is this. I want you to respect yourself, respect each other, and respect the citizens." What does that look like? You respect yourself by doing the things you need to do to make sure you're ready to come to work, right? That means physical fitness. If you come to work and you can't do your job, then you can't do those. You're not looking out for yourself. You're not looking out for each other. And you're not looking out for the citizens. You're not giving anybody their best. If you come to work and your home life's a wreck, I know you can't always help that, but you're not going to give your best to the citizens and to each other if that's the case. But that stems out. I use the word respect in the fire department, but it stems out of it's love is what it is. I change. If I was doing it at church, I say the same thing. Love, but it starts with God. But that's part of yourself. Working on yourself as you love God, you love others, right? And so I really feel like my job has become helping people to understand and kind of rekindle what service looks like, what service is. Because Christian service and the fire service really are not that different. They're pretty much the same. You're choosing the best definition of love I ever remember hearing. I think I heard it in seminary, and I've tried for years to remember who said it so I could give them due credit. But it's putting someone else's wants, needs, and desires above your own. It's a decision to put someone else's wants, needs, and desires above what you want, maybe what you need and what you desire. I think when we come in the fire service, we inherently, when we sign up, we know that's the job we're signing up to do. To put the citizens, the other guys on our girls on our crew, we're volunteering. We're choosing to put their wants, needs, and desires above ours because it's service. That's what it is. Somewhere down the line, a lot of us lose that. We get so focused on pushing for raises, for pushing for equipment, for pushing for the things that we want, that we forget that, and not that those things are bad, they're great and they're needed. They are, but not at the expense of losing your focus, and so many of us and I'll throw myself in this too, because I've been in that category myself in the past. We forget what our mission is. And I think you have to have a personal mission. You have to know what your job is, what you're there for, why you're there. But I think I would like to think all of us in the fire service got into it because we wanted to help others. We wanted to do a job where they would, and man, if they'll pay you, 3/4 of the people who do this job get paid nothing. They're volunteers, I mean, we're blessed that we get paid to do this job that a lot of people do for free. We get paid to go to training. We get paid for all this stuff. We forget about the blessing of getting to do this as a profession, and get so lost and focused on all of our personal wants and desires that we forget that we're supposed to be selfless. That's our job. I mean, if somebody's in a house, if there's a 20-year-old girl in a house, and they're like, she's in there and it's fully involved and we're going defensive, you're going to have an argument. I'm arguing with and anybody in our department, anybody that I know, any firefighter I know, if they say there's a 20-year-old girl, she may be alive, she's in the house, it's fully involved, we're going defensive. If your battalion chief or incident command says that, they're going to have an argument. You're probably going to have somebody disobey that command. They're just going to say, screw it, I'm going in. That's what I signed up for. And I think in that regard, taking a bullet for somebody, dying for somebody, we're gung-ho. We'll do that. But the daily dying to self, the daily sacrificing for others, we mess that part up. Like we'll make that one-time decision that has an eternal, forever consequence of maybe dying ourselves. We'll jump on that all day long, because that's our job. That's what we signed up for. What we also signed up for was daily dying to self and saying, you know what? Yeah, it's a lift assist at 3 a.m. because, grandma fell down and can't get up, and I'm comfy in bed and I don't want to get out. And I've heard guys so many times say, this isn't what I signed up to do. Yes, it is. This is what you signed up for. You signed up to serve. That looks different. We're jacks of all trades. If the cat's in a tree, they call the fire department. I have done that about 12 or 13 years ago. A 35-foot extension ladder, cat out of a tree, they call us for that stuff. We had last year at Christmas, not this Christmas, the year before, we had a car that went off the road and ended up having mother, father, kids. Mom lived, son lived. One of the daughters we pulled out, did CPR, got her back. The other daughter, a year later, never found her. The creek was really high, ran into another creek, into a river, and we spent months looking for her. The dad was pulled out, deceased. And I mean, it was a rough thing. Who gets called for that? Us. If it's a fire, who gets called? Us. If it's a heart attack, who gets called? Us. Somebody locks their keys in their car. We don't have a Jimmy. We can't do that. We're going to break your window, but we'll get in if we need to. Who do they call? Us. I mean, we're jacks of all trades, and we need to remember that people don't call us usually because they want to. They call us because they don't know who else to call. And our job is to serve. And so I think that's part of what I've really been passionate about the last several months, especially, is trying to remind people what service is. Do I like getting up at 3 a.m.? No, I'm 43 years old. I don't want to get up at 3 a.m. If I was 23, wouldn't bother me as much. If I make one call at night, I'll tell you this, and maybe you can identify with this. If I make one call at night, I need a nap the next day. I used to not do that. I used to not be that way, but I am now. I'm getting to that point. I have to have that recovery nap, safety nap, we call it. I don't want to do it either, but it is what we signed up for. It's what we're called to do.
Man, I love it. Serve God and serve people and put others first before yourself, brother. You couldn't have said it better than I could. All right, these are the rapid fire. These are one-word answers, because otherwise we'll be here forever. And I'll hang out with you forever, but I know people are probably tired of listening to us. All right, so these are particular to you. All right, so one-word answers. Preaching or playing music?
Music.
Singing or playing?
Playing.
Acoustic or electric guitar?
Electric.
Strat or telly?
Telly.
All right, this one I might judge you. Stump box or digital?
Both.
smart man.
On pedal boards, both.
Awesome. And I went digital a few years ago. But if we start talking gear, we're going to be here all afternoon.
Another talk, another podcast.
I'm going to close it. Another podcast for sure. So Colby, thank you so much for being here with us, brother. So how can people reach out to you? How can they find the podcast? How can they find the book? Tell us how they can get in contact with you.
For the book, if you just go to Amazon, type in Lead Like a Real Man or my name, Colby Rich, you can find the book. If you want to check out the podcast, it's called To Lead. It's on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, and on YouTube. We try to do weekly, pretty much, podcasts. That doesn't always happen, depending on what the week looks like. But a Linktree, if you go to Linktree and just search my name under Linktree, I've got a Linktree that has links to all that stuff, and so you can find me there too.
Awesome, brother. Everybody, once again, this is Colby Rich. He's the author of Lead Like Real Man. He's the voice behind Call to Lead podcast. Rich, I'm so excited to have you on here. So everybody, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. If you enjoyed this, share with somebody, and perhaps it can impact somebody and be a blessing on their lives. And don't forget to keep the first things first, and I'll see you guys next time.